One of the things that we're going to start with to sort of set the stage for this conversation is a pre-taped video from one of our in this space. His name is Roger W. Robinson. He began his distinguished career in public service, having been a vice president for investments by the Chase Manhattan Bank in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia, with time spent as the senior director for international economic affairs for the Reagan National Security Council. He has subsequently served in a variety of other capacities, notably as the chairman and the ranking member at different points of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. He's also the chairman of the Prague Security Studies Institute, a great friend of our Committee on the Present Danger of China and a remarkable leader with respect to matters involving economic and particularly financial warfare. We're going to hear from Roger Robinson on the subject of reprising the Reagan strategy that brought down the USSR, namely by using financial warfare against our time's existential threat to freedom, the Chinese Communist Party. Let's go to Roger Robinson's tape now.
I'm very grateful to the chairman of that committee, Mike Gallagher, who has proved a visionary in the unrestricted warfare area, particularly the one that is most unsung and, in my mind, the most problematic, which can be summed up in two words: the money. We're not talking about just side change here. We're talking about trillions of dollars of a U.S. investor retirement and other dollar investments that have flowed into what they thought were benign investment portfolios run by Wall Street into the coffers of the Chinese Communist Party, often via its state-controlled proxy companies, of which there are now some 5,000 in our marketplace, scooping up those dollars in order to finance the flagging economic fortunes of China as we speak. There has been over 20 years of zero diligence being performed by Wall Street and by the U.S. government and its regulators in terms of trying to understand who these Chinese companies are that have been coming to our markets. Are they sanctioned? Are they human rights abusers? Are they national security violators of the type that are building advanced weapon systems for the People's Liberation Army? Not a single question asked, a complete free lunch program, and what I consider to be the greatest financial scandal in modern history, without doubt, whereby we've seen our democracy transfer trillions of dollars of funds under management to a totalitarian police state bent on our utter destruction, aided and abetted by greed-driven Wall Street firms, and what I'm sadly to report are conflicted top levels of the Treasury Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the National Economic Council. Now, this is the root of the problem and why we've had so little dialogue on the strategic implications of the money and why we've done so little in terms of defending our interests. As we should all remember, money kills in the hands of totalitarian police state just as surely as weapon systems. And we've done nothing about it. Now, again, getting back to Chairman Gallagher, he has understood this problem as few in Congress have. He gave me a special opportunity with oral and written testimony, which I tried to use to the full, to lay out the facts of the case. This is not an opinion or ideological piece of work. It's based on empirical facts, and those facts, in my judgment, are irrefutable. And we have them all in one place at one time, And I'm gratified to say that they just didn't sit there gathering moss. In fact, Chairman Gallagher and the committee, on a bipartisan basis, have taken the initiative to launch a number of major forays into this field, the most recent being a letter to the chairman of BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, $9 trillion under management, Larry Fink, and Henry Fernandez, the chairman of MSCI, which is the largest family of indices in America. They work hand in glove. MSCI is the index provider for the passive investment products of BlackRock, and as such, they are partners in what I'm sad to say are fiduciary malfeasance of the highest order that has been so deleterious to our human rights policies and our national security. He has taken them on frontally, and it is of signal importance, and it's the first time, I'll just say quickly, that the high, thick walls of Wall Street have been truly breached. Over those 20 years I talked about, when these thousands of Chinese companies came uncontested, unreviewed, unscreened into the portfolios, investment portfolios of the American people. Everyone imagined on Wall Street that the subject was so complicated, passive investment funds, A-shares, variable interest entities, all the jargon of Wall Street was used to confuse policymakers in the Congress and the executive branch and keep it in a world of what you once called the masters of the universe, those self-styled Wall Street mavens. And they did that very successfully. But now that more and more policymakers like Mike Gallagher are onto them, so to speak, they've fallen back to a much less enviable position, which is this: if it's not illegal, we're doing it, period. And right now, sadly, because of the dearth of proper legislation and a complete default on the part of the executive branch, for the most part, with some notable exceptions in the Trump administration, they now are in a position where they're still attracting companies that have been involved in all sorts of nefarious activities, some that come to mind, like equipping concentration camps, aiding and abetting genocide, trafficking in slave labor, building the surveillance state, militarizing the islands in the South China Sea, building those hypersonic glide vehicles and aircraft carriers and advanced weapon systems for the PLA. In other words, all manner of bad actors in a totally non-transparent, non-fiduciarily sound environment of violation of U.S. securities laws by every one of those companies as we sit here today. No investor protection to speak of. And in this environment, they're still trying to defend themselves by saying, if it's not illegal, we're doing it. I think what the chairman and the committee have done on both sides of the aisle is to say, oh, no, you don't. There's going to be reputational damage, and there's going to be damage to your brand by your callousness and complete disregard, not just to human rights and national security, but investor protection. Everybody knows that the Chinese communists have now criminalized due diligence. They've just put out an edict in the last 2 weeks that says no more recording of material risks about China, because we're quite offended by the fact that you see us as a risk. I mean, the point is, the whole mechanism of informing investors properly so that they can make informed decisions has been out the window and has never been present and is at an all-time low in non-transparency right now. So These guys finally have a problem on Wall Street, a big problem. And this is just the beginning. It's going to move out from there to FTSE Russell, to Vanguard, to State Street, to Dow S&P. In other words, this isn't going to stop at BlackRock and MSCI. Finally, the lights are on. Well, we have that very murky over-the-counter market that nobody seems to understand how it works, but the securities, read stocks and bonds of Chinese companies, are traded there. Gee, how many Chinese companies are there? Last time we checked, about 900, versus, as you pointed out, the 260 or so that are on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. Then we have A shares. What are A shares? That's not so complicated. They're stocks that are traded only on domestic Chinese exchanges. Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, period. They haven't been moved to Hong Kong or New York or Singapore or anywhere else, right? And so what happened was MSCI, who was pressured to do it by China, there's Wall Street Journal articles about this, you don't have to believe me, with arm twisting against Morgan Stanley and others, they forced the MSCI index provider to take their A shares, which are now multiplied into the thousands, right? And put them into the portfolios of first onto their indices themselves, which are slavishly then translated by asset managers into investment products, exchange traded funds, mutual funds. That's where you and I lose our money, so to speak, thinking unwittingly that these are all responsible investments from trustworthy fiduciaries. Far from it. And so that's the way they got in the back door, completely unregulated, non-compliant with U.S. federal securities laws, no material risk disclosure, no disclosure of their financials, which they regard as state secrets. Gee, I wonder how we're supposed to make a decision about a sound investment, right? I mean, it's almost ludicrous to talk about. Scandalously, in May of 2013, the SEC, the PCAOB, which is a subset of the SEC, and the equivalent in China, the China Regulatory Commission, cut a deal that waived federal audits of Chinese companies coming to our markets, a requirement that is absolute in the case of American firms and other foreign companies that are doing business in our markets. Who was it that was looking after the China portfolio during that period? Well, it was the Obama administration, and the China portfolio was largely handled by then Vice President Biden. So if we're wondering how those trillions moved and continue to move with no scrutiny as to where the money's going and how it's being used to our great detriment, that's a good summary.
A good summary indeed, and a great starting point, Roger Robinson, for this panel discussion. I regret that I inadvertently failed to mention something that Roger alluded to several times in the course of those remarks, namely his testimony before the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, chaired by Mike Gallagher, as he mentioned. It took place on the 17th of May, I believe, and was a tour de force, really, in terms of presenting in greater detail the kind of information that he has just shared with us, and with palpable effect, namely the actions now being taken by the committee on a bipartisan basis to investigate BlackRock and MSCI.